On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Anna Lebron. She is the Senior Manager for Site Reliability, Resilience, and Observability Engineering at Enova. She's going to tell us what she does because I know it's a mouthful there. But what we're going to be talking about in this podcast episode is really the intersection of how SRE impacts business and how it's a slightly different function. It's not purely just technology. It's a lot of business involvement, a lot of planning with the business, and we're going to get a lot of insights. I'm excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Amir, for having me here. I'm really excited.
Absolutely. All right, Anna, let us know two things. Let us know what Enova does. Just make sure everyone is aware. And secondly, your title obviously reflects a lot of site reliability work, but let us know what your responsibilities are and we'll dive in from there.
Yeah, of course. So Enova is a fintech company. We provide online financial services to consumer and small business. We use a lot of technology and analytics to offer the service that we provide, which is to provide accessible credit to millions of customers. So as you well mentioned, my role is a manager within site reliability engineering, observability, and resiliency. My team is responsible to keep operational excellence at the scale. So I manage a group of 16 extremely talented site reliability engineers and leaders that focus on those three pillars, right? Observability, making sure that we monitor our system, making sure that we alert, when something doesn't behave properly. Reliability, ensuring that our systems do not fail often, right? And that we are consistently meeting our customers' expectations. And lastly, resiliency, which is ensuring that when our system fail, because we know complex systems always fail, making sure that we recover as soon as possible, that we mitigate the impact for the customers, and more importantly, that we learn from those, that we put actions in place so we prevent it in the future.
Absolutely. And I guess that, you mentioned obviously complex systems always fail. I think that's just the way of the world, let alone technology solutions. I guess to start off the episode, if you can maybe help us understand. So SRE, we know obviously its job from a technical perspective. Obviously, it has an involvement when we talk about systems failing, that becomes a business impact. So maybe talk to us initially about what that intersection of SRE and business looks like.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting topic because we hear a lot in the SRE world that reliability is the most important feature of our system or applications, right? And obviously, SRE is the team that focuses a lot on that reliability, on that feature. And when we understand reliability as the feature of the system, it actually helps us a lot to align and to understand that the goals are the same that's from our business teams, right? SREs provide a feature, which is reliability, versus our business teams, they provide product to serve our customers. And they both converge on the same place, which is to meet our customers' expectations, either on the reliability side or on the product implementation feature side of the house. So I think that's a really good way to kind of see how both worlds intersects. Another aspect that I like to kind of talk about is how we measure reliability, right? We hear a lot the concept of SLAs, SLOs, service level indicators, and service level objectives in the SRE world. And both of those terms, SLIs being important metrics for the customers and SLOs being the target for those metrics, they're both based on our customers' perspective, right? There is a deep focus on what does our users expect out of our technology? So I think that kind of user perspective of reliability, on how we measure reliability, is actually the key part of the role of an SRE to understand how it relates to our business peers.
Absolutely. And I guess, reliability is a feature of the system. I really like that. I guess when you're looking at that, obviously you have different SLAs, SLOs, you have different customers. When you're talking about reliability as a feature, I guess from your point of view in SRE, when you're interacting with a business, how do you layer your group's overall goal for reliability versus then each customer that has independent, obviously, needs from a system? Obviously, everyone wants their system up, but there might be different service level agreements based on different, customers to your team.
Right. So it's all a negotiation. And in our case, we are a centralized SRE teams. meaning we support every single product, every single business across every platform. There is other SRE models that they are like embedded within like the product team. So they can obviously like contribute way more into like reliability for that product itself. In our case, we do focus a lot on like self-service platform processes, capabilities to ensure that reliability, and SLI, SLO being obviously one of the standard. And not that alone, like SREs, they generally have like a combination of reactive and proactive work, right? Which make the entire ecosystem of an SRE even more complicated, taking all these different requests coming from many different places. So I think a very important aspect for us to make sure that we meet our customers' expectations and we are so like able to help our peers on the business side, on the technology side, is that we understand the urgency of the incidents that we get and the requirements that we get, and that we also are clear on the ownership of those, right? I think those two aspects are really important part of how we take requests and how we address unexpected work, coming from our different peers and teams.
Interesting. You mentioned, being proactive, being reactive, and obviously you have SLAs that you're managing too. How do you balance obviously some of that nature of, well, we have commitments, but we have to go deal with this because obviously it's part of the commitment, but yet, it was unscheduled. Like, how does that impact the team? How does that impact your world?
Yeah, that's probably one of the hardest part of an SRE. And I see now with the DevOps movement, right? And that is more and more like embedded into the industry. It's almost a challenge for every single engineering team, right? Because every single engineering team is going to be expected to handle unexpected operational work. In our case, and what I have seen being recommended out in the industry, certainly Google recommend that in their books, right? Which is like just keeping your operational work under 50% of your engineering time, right? And find a way to measure that and making sure that your teams do not spend most of the day basically firefighting through requests that you get into the queue. So that's something that we measure. And this is one of the important aspect or skill set of SREs, is that we measure everything, right? Like metric is at the core of like the SRE team. And we make sure that if for any reason our operational work is consuming more than that 50% of our time, we need to like stop what we're doing, take a step back and holistically readdress how do we handle the situation, right? How do we address the manual work, the toil that we're getting? How do we automate more things? How do we provide more self-service infrastructure? How do we add new features to the tools that we have in place so we can keep that operations at a scale, right? Because if we keep the entire day just fighting through incidents, we're not going to get any preventative work in place. So that's something that we do within our SRE team. I think it's very common in the industry to follow that 50-50 balance between reactive versus proactive work.
Absolutely. I guess when you're talking about, dealing with SLAs, dealing with, having to deal with issues and outages, when it comes to actually, the partnership with the business and having them, understand what's happening, what's the process look like for your team when you do experience an outage? How do you guys handle that dotted line to the business to make sure they're aware? How quickly does that happen? Can you maybe walk us through a little bit of your process?
Right, definitely. So the incident response process, when something goes wrong, again, it depends a lot on the urgency of that, right? It's certainly very different when you have like one customer experiences like performance issues than when your entire database is down, right? And the business is losing a ton of money. So really understanding that difference is very important in terms of like setting expectations with our business peers on how we're going to react to those incidents. Now, when it comes to like major incidents, right? Like things that they're really bad for the organization, I think communicating with our business very clearly and very accurate is very important. And I do actually participate actively in those type of incidents, right? Like impact is at the core of like the first question basically that we ask when we have a production incident. What is the business impact? And it always needs to be articulated in like business terms, right? Like how many customers are being impacted? What is the extent of that impact, right? Is it like random? Is it like every single customer across all our product? And then we also have like very well set expectations of how we expect all our engineer peers and business peers to react under these type of circumstances. And I think that is very important and set us up for success when we are handling a major incident, because we are all collaborating exactly under the same level of expectations, right? Which is, this is our top priority, right? We drop everything that we're doing and we're actually going to solve this problem. So I think leveling those expectations and crystal clear communicating with our business about what is wrong, it's very important key aspects for successfully handle those major outage production incidents.
Interesting. I know you mentioned DevOps. I know you're responsible more for the SRE world. Obviously, security when it comes to DevOps, DevSecOps, they're shifting left. Are you seeing, I guess, because you are responsible for systems being up, you're observing it, is the cybersecurity component, is that partnership growing? Are you guys seeing a shift left into the SRE world?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the whole DevOps movement, it has actually impacted every single area of organizations, right? Like generally, like when we implement DevOps, it's not like you implement it and it's done, right? You don't release a tool and then you are operating under that manifesto. I think it's a culture, it's a way of operating that it actually is spread across every single team, including the security engineering team. So I have definitely seen within our own company and even with talking to like other peers in the industry, a shift left, right? Which is like, we all need to be accountable. We all need to be like owning like operational work, right? That comes into our place as it comes to like major outage, customer impacting incidents, and those type of scenarios. And that applies not only to like our business team or software engineering, it actually applies to our security engineering team as well, right? It's way easier to have that embedded on like the implementation of our tools, on the implementation of our product, that actually just having like a very centralized team having to like solve every single security incidents, right, that is happening in the company. So I do believe that collaboration, that ownership that the DevOps movement have bring to a lot of organizations, it actually touched every single department at the company, which is the beauty of it, right? Like it's a culture shift. It's actually like a cultural shift.
Absolutely. Do you guys, I guess, on a day-to-day business, how closely do you work with the security engineering team or the cybersecurity function at Enova?
Yeah, we work pretty close with them. It's still like quite centralized, and that DevSecOps, right? Like it's taking us a little bit longer to adapt, but certainly like we have implemented that culture on the software engineering side. And when it comes to like production incident, like we still bring our security engineers into like room. They own those incidents. They collaborate with like software engineers, with the site reliability engineer, with our business peers. So there is a very close collaboration. We try to break those silos, right? Like I think we are all on the same boat to achieve the same goal, which is to remediate the incident.
Absolutely. I guess when you're looking at, as you're planning for the future and you're looking at different tools, for your team, how expansive, when you're looking for tools, how wide do you have to start looking at other teams in your collaboration with different teams to make sure, tools fit you, the organization, or is it really a focus of, hey, if the tool fits us, that's really the most important?
Yeah, so we actually like talk with our peers a lot. And as I mentioned before, like SRE have a tremendous amount of data, right? Like we are like a very metrics driven type of team. So when it comes to like exploring new tools and like new platforms, new solutions that we want to put in place, we make a lot of use of the data that we have, right? Site reliability engineers, they know how the system felt, they know how often they felt, how they impact our customer, what things take the longest to resolve. So we use all that data and all those metrics to actually propose or recommend the next tooling solution or the next platform. And it definitely encouraged engineers to like use data and metrics to actually put those solutions in place, right? I think in the past, some engineers have focused a lot on the engineering reasons, right? But I think presenting like customer data and metrics is actually very, very valuable to like collaborate with our peers on business and on the IT teams to put in place the next platform or solution.
Absolutely. And I guess to go back, I know in the original part of the conversation, we talked about the intersection you're working with business. So when I guess business is starting to plan for different initiatives and projects, how early does the SRE function get involved? Or at what point do you get involved when you're talking about future business projects?
Yeah. So I always think they need to be involved from the very beginning, right? Like reliability should be a feature that is being thought about right at the beginning of your implementation. In our specific case, I know, as I mentioned, we are a centralized team. So that involvement up front is a little bit more difficult because we are not embedded in the product itself. But reliability, observability, even resiliency should not be an afterthought, right? We shouldn't be thinking about it when things break into production, although sometimes we do it that way. We should be thinking about it very upfront. And sometimes just very simple mental questions, right? About like, what happens if this system break or if this service is not available? Or what happens if this other system cannot communicate with system B, right? Like, is there like a failover process? Is there like a graceful error that is being triggered to the customer? Even like having that thought process right before implementing your application, it really helps a lot to build those reliable service. So I always encourage to like collaborate upfront when we are just like starting the implementation. I understand depending on the size of the team and how embedded SRE is within like the product itself, sometimes it's not as feasible.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Obviously, every organization is going to have a different entry point for the SRE team. And I guess talking about, the technology and the business aspects of being an SRE, when it comes to celebrating, and I ask this a lot, but I'm curious for you, especially when you're, a service kind of like the SRE team is and the way you've described it, when you go to celebrate the team's successes, right? A lot of times people aren't going to, pick out SRE because nothing's wrong. That's actually really good. Nobody's calling your name. Everything's great. It's when things go wrong, all of a sudden, hey, and what's going on? But how do you celebrate those wins? Obviously, from both the technology side and then also the business side.
Right. So it's interesting when we have, I know like having outages, having a production incident, it have a very negative meaning for a lot of engineers, right? Everyone thinks like, oh no, another production incident, another outage. I tend to tell some of my peers and team members, like, just get excited because this is your opportunity to shine. This is your opportunity to actually like show the entire organizations how can you troubleshoot, how you can communicate to business, to leadership, right? Like, and it's an awesome opportunity to learn things that you wouldn't know about your system unless you have this production incident. So I try to bring that excitement to my team members about like production incident and outages. And as I mentioned, like when things go wrong, especially within Enova, right? Like it's not like SRE fault, right? Everyone's looking at SREs all the time. This is like a shared accountability and responsibility. So we work a lot with other teams that they may not live and breathe production incident as often as we do to get comfortable when they have production incidents. So they can actually be efficient when troubleshooting. They know how to communicate. They know how to escalate. And we actually run postmortems, right? Blameless retrospective. And we focus a lot about what we learned, what challenges did we have. I mean, we don't focus on like who did what and why did you do this, right? It's more about like, what opportunity are we getting out of this? Because in some cases, without those production incidents, without those outages, we wouldn't know how our system behave under certain scenarios, right? So that's how I try to like encourage not only my team members, but like other engineers on other teams to like celebrate production incident actually, right? Like they are great opportunities, great learnings. experience. And if you can like be efficient in a production incident, you can go through like any single other scenario at your company.
Absolutely. I like the way you looked at it. It's the motivation to go, hey, this is your time to shine, go tackle it. This is when you can actually, be the hero of the story. That's really essentially what happens.
Exactly. Just being a hero.
Yeah, everyone wants to be a hero at some point. I think
of course,
it's a good time to be able to show the company what you can do.
Right.
I want to thank you for your time. I know we're getting close to the end. I want to ask you a couple of final questions. Something new we've been asking guests now is, what they want to hear from a subsequent leader. So I was going to ask you, is there a topic or something you would love to hear about from a future guest?
Yeah, so you can tell I'm very passionate about like incident response, resiliency, right? Like those scenarios, like in some cases, not everyone is super comfortable with, but I actually think we all experience across all our organizations because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, right, like failures happen. We cannot avoid them. And I know every single company handles those differently. So I would love to hear more about those, right? Like how different companies, different business actually handle those unexpected outage, what are their tricks to make them run smoothly and efficient and actually create that culture of resiliency. That's a topic I'm really passionate about and always willing to hear more about.
Absolutely. That's a good one. I like that. I think I'd love to get a few viewpoints on that, hopefully at some point. I guess if in terms of you personally, if somebody wants to touch base with you regarding anything you've mentioned on the podcast, what's a good way of somebody getting a hold of you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably like the best way. Try to be pretty active that have a big network of like peers from previous jobs and from my current company. So LinkedIn is definitely the best way to reach out.
Okay. We'll make sure to include your LinkedIn handle on that. Again, thank you for being on the podcast. I think, great advice, great insights. I appreciate you sharing.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until next time, I always ask for two things. One is, if you find the podcast useful, just share it with somebody else that you might know. That's the way we grow. We don't really advertise it. We just really want the organic growth. So I thank everyone that does share the podcast on a weekly basis. And then if you actually know someone that could speak on the topic and I mentioned in terms of, handling unexpected outages, incident response processes, someone that wants to talk about it from their company's point of view, I think there's other people that love to hear that as well. So reach out to me. Let me know if you do know someone. Until next time. Thank you. Goodbye.